Rain had not been expected on that stretch of desert. The sky had been clear just an hour before, with only a thin line of clouds resting behind the distant mesas. By the time the storm rolled over the plains, the earth had already turned cold, and the wind carried the scent of dust, wet sage, and fear. An Apache warrior rode slowly along a narrow trail. Guiding his horse through the rising mud, the leather reins slick beneath his fingers. He had not planned to be out this late, but he was tracking the trail of a stolen horse taken from a nearby ranch. The clouds above cracked open with another clap of thunder, but he ignored it. Keeping his eyes fixed on the ground as the prince faded into the rain, he was accustomed to the harshness of the land. Storms came fast. People disappeared even faster. Yet nothing in his night's journey prepared him for the sound that drifted through the rain. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the thunder. A soft cry, then another. Not the cry of a woman or grown man, but something higher, trembling and afraid. He tightened his grip, raised his chin, and slowed his horse. Letting the storm settle enough for him to hear again, there it was, whimpering. Several voices. Close together, he turned off the trail, cutting through brush and wet grass. His horse snorted, uneasy, but obeyed. The moonlight slipped through the clouds in small silver streaks, just enough to show movement beneath a cluster of trees. Shapes sat huddled in the mud, shaking, wrapped in torn blankets and old coats. He counted 1, then 2, then more. 7 children sat in a trembling circle, barefoot, drenched, and clinging to one another like a single frightened heartbeat. They did not speak when he approached. Some stared with wide eyes, some hid their faces, and one tried to stand, but collapsed back to the ground with exhaustion. They looked like they had walked a long distance with no shelter and no idea where to go. Their clothes looked worn, stitched many times, like life had been hard for a long while. They were thin, hungry, and freezing. He dismounted with quiet steps, hands open to show he meant no harm. The oldest, a boy perhaps in his early teens, lifted his chin to block the smaller ones behind him. His voice shook as he forced out a warning, telling the warrior to stay back. The warrior respected his bravery. He did not move closer, only knelt at a distance and spoke in a calm voice, telling them the storm would not last, that he had water, that he could help. The children looked at one another, unsure. Their fear was not just of the night or storm. It was deeper, rooted in something they had already endured long before he arrived. The youngest girl, hardly more than 5, crawled forward and tugged at his knee, whispering that their mother told them to keep walking, no matter how tired they became. The warrior finally asked where she was. The girl turned and pointed behind them, toward the darkness beyond the trees. A rush of thunder shook the ground. The warrior rose quickly, eyes attempting to pierce the rain. At first he saw nothing, just tall grass and shadows. Then faint movement, staggering, struggling to stay upright. A woman emerged, soaked, hair clinging to her face, hands pushing against the wind as though carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. Her legs buckled once, then again, and she forced herself onward. Eyes locked on her children, she had been walking behind them, guarding them, making sure they stayed safe, even as her body failed. The warrior took one step toward her, but stopped, watching her fight to stay conscious. The children tried to call out to her, voices small and broken. But barely heard through the storm, she reached them at last, placing her hands on the shoulders of the 2 smallest as if counting them, making sure all 7 were there. She let out a breath of relief, the kind only a mother could know after bringing her children through danger. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled too much to form words. She lifted her head to the warrior, eyes pleading, as though she had no strength left to explain what happened. Before she could finish even a single sentence, her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed face first into the mud. The children screamed for her, their fear turning into panic. The warrior rushed forward and knelt beside her, turning her over carefully. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, and her pulse weak. She was drenched and bruised, her clothes torn like she had fled something rather than simply traveled. He brushed wet hair from her face and saw exhaustion etched into her features. the kind earned after too many nights without rest. He asked the children how long they had been walking. They whispered that they had left a small settlement far east, that men there had made life impossible, that the mother said they needed to escape before sunrise. They did not say more. They looked too afraid to speak of it. The warrior understood there were things they were not ready to relive, not even with a stranger helping them. He lifted the woman carefully into his arms, but she stirred only slightly, eyes half open, whispering a word he could not understand. Then she fell unconscious again. The rain began to slow, but the wind carried a silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. The warrior knew he needed to get them to shelter. 7 children could not survive the night alone, not out here with no heat, no shelter, and no protection. He guided them toward his horse, planning to make several trips or find a safer place nearby. The oldest boy insisted he could walk, carrying 2 of the youngest on his back. The warrior glanced into the darkness behind them again. He felt like they were being watched, not by animals, but by eyes filled with intention. When lightning flashed across the plains, he caught a glimpse of boot prints trailing behind the family, not far from where he had first seen them. Fresh prints, more than one man. Heavy steps, parallel tracks. Someone had been following them through the storm. He did not tell the children. He simply whispered to keep close and move fast. The mother remained limp in his arms, her breathing faint but present. Her weight felt like a silent plea for help, and he carried her with the care of someone who understood what it meant to hold another. Life in his hands, as they left the grove of trees. Thunder rolled again, and the warrior paused. In the distance, beyond the rain, a faint lantern flickered. It was not theirs, and it was getting closer. The lantern in the distance flickered again, carrying a faint orange glow that pulsed against the darkness like a heartbeat. The warrior tightened his hold on the unconscious woman and whispered for the children to stay silent. They pressed close to one another, fear returning to their eyes as if the storm itself had taken human shape and come after them. The warrior guided them off the open trail and into a low patch of brush, using the shadows to conceal their shapes. The rain had slowed, leaving the land slick with mud, and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. He watched the distant light move. It swayed slowly, controlled by someone on foot. Whoever carried it was not searching blindly. The pace was steady, almost sure, as though they already knew the direction of their trail. The warrior kept his breath low and steady. He had seen hunters move the same way when they tracked a wounded deer, following prints long covered by rain. This was not the casual walk of a traveler. It was the stride of a man with purpose. The oldest boy clutched the smallest child, whispering a promise that everything would be fine, though his voice trembled with doubt. The warrior admired his courage. It was not the loud kind that fought battles, but the quiet kind that kept family together when everything else fell apart. He asked the boy again how long they had been traveling. The boy hesitated before admitting they had been walking for 3 days, leaving their settlement in the dead of night. They had not slept properly since. The warrior asked if they had family waiting somewhere, but they shook their heads. The woman had not told them where they were going, only that they needed to get away. By the time the lantern light faded behind the hills, the children were shivering again. The warrior finally rose, lifting the woman once more and helping the children to their feet. He led them down a narrow slope until the brush gave way to a shallow ravine that would shield them from sight. The path was rough, but safer than the open trail. He knew a hidden cave not far from here, a dry place used by hunters during winter storms. If they reached it, the children could warm up, and the woman could rest long enough for him to learn what. Danger followed them. The youngest ones struggled to keep up. The warrior stopped several times to let them breathe, though every pause felt like a risk. He did not like moving slowly when someone was behind them. The night was too silent now. No thunder, no wind. Just the soft sound of their feet sliding through wet soil. He kept his hand near the handle of his knife, ready if anything came from the darkness. Halfway down the ravine, the woman stirred in his arms. Her eyes blinked open weakly, unfocused and glassy. She tried to lift her head, whispering something he could not make out. He lowered her enough to let her sit upright, though he still supported her weight. She looked at her children first, counting them again, touching their faces like she needed to feel they were real. Tears mixed with the rain still clinging to her cheeks. Only after she saw they were safe did she look at the warrior. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw from cold and exhaustion. He offered her water from a small leather pouch. She hesitated only a second, then drank in slow, careful sips. Her voice finally came, soft as a dying ember. She explained that they had lived far east, on a stretch of land where the town had once welcomed them. Her husband had built a small cabin and trapped game to provide for the children. The warrior could hear in her voice that life had never been easy. But there must have been love there once. Then she paused. Her eyes lowered. She did not speak the next part right away. The oldest boy finished for her in a whisper. Their father had died this past winter. Since then, things had changed with the townsfolk. Neighbors who once shared food now turned away. Men who once traded honest goods began making demands. The mother tried to work to support the family, but some men wanted payment she could not give. When she refused, trouble began. Doors shut. Markets stopped selling to her. Soon, the threats came at night. Loud voices outside the cabin, calling her heartless names. The children still did not understand. She tried to stay strong for them, keeping them warm, hunting small game, mending clothes, praying each day things would get better. But one night, after she refused to marry a man she barely knew, the threats turned into something worse. Someone set fire near their barn. Someone cut the rope holding their only mule. Someone threw stones through the window while the children slept. The warrior listened without speaking. He had seen such things before. He knew what fear looked like after too many nights of running. The mother whispered that she finally gathered her children and fled under the cover of darkness, hoping to reach another settlement far west, where she heard there were ranchers who hired families for work. She thought they could start over, but they had only made it halfway before their supplies ran out and the storm caught them on the plains. The warrior asked why someone would chase them this far. The mother shakenly admitted she overheard men saying the land her husband built on might be claimed for something bigger. Maybe a rail line or cattle expansion. She did not know if that was true. She only knew she had been warned not to return alive. The ravine opened slightly, giving them more room to walk. The warrior thought about her words as he carried her again. The world was changing. Ranches were expanding. Railroads cutting across old paths. Land fights had turned neighbors into enemies. He knew both sides of the struggle, the one where people fought to protect what they had, and the one where power swallowed those who had too little. The children moved closer to him now, trusting him more. The oldest boy walked beside him, asking in a quiet voice if he was taking them somewhere safe. The warrior told him about the cave, how they could rest until sunrise. The boy nodded, though worry still lingered in his eyes. Children who lived through hardship grew fast, but their hearts still carried fear. As they neared the bend in the ravine, something flickered again behind them. The lantern was back, brighter now, closer than before. The warrior stopped, motioned for silence, and watched the ridge. The light moved in a slow, sweeping motion, like someone searching the ground, scanning the rocks and brush. More than one shadow followed it. The warrior stepped in front of the children again. The mother tried to rise, but lacked strength, so he gently lowered her behind a cluster of stones. She reached for her oldest child, and he took her hand, trying to reassure her. The warrior placed a hand on the hilt of his knife, but kept it hidden beneath his coat. He did not want to fight unless he had no choice. He had lived long enough to know that battles could do more harm than good. But he also knew men who hunted families through storms did not come with kind intentions. The lantern light paused. Whoever carried it stood still, listening to the night. The warrior held his breath, ready to move the children deeper into the ravine. Then, from beyond the ridge, a second light appeared. This time, it was not a lantern, it was a torch, and both lights began moving, toward them at once. The torchlight flickered like fire, hungry for air. Climbing down the ridge with slow determination, the lantern beside it swung with each step, casting long shadows that crept along the ravine walls. The warrior felt the weight of danger pressing closer. He motioned the children farther back into the narrowest part of the ravine, keeping his body between them and the strangers. The mother tried to whisper something, but he quieted her gently, knowing sound could give them away. The children huddled together, frightened and shivering. The oldest boy watched the two approaching lights with a mix of fear and anger, his jaw clenched tight. It was clear he wanted to protect his family, but he was still only a child, carrying more worry than any young heart should bear. The warrior placed a hand on his shoulder and promised to shield them. The boy finally nodded, though his eyes never left the torch. The warrior's mind raced as he crouched behind a boulder. He studied the way the men moved, their silhouettes growing larger with each step. They came from the same area the family had fled, that much was clear. Whoever they were tracking with purpose, closing in on the only people who escaped their reach. The storm had tried to hide the children's path, but it seemed these pursuers knew exactly where to look. A memory flickered in the warrior's thoughts. Years ago, a small farming town had pushed a poor family off their land for a railroad plan that never came true. Those who resisted were forced into silence. He had seen the look in the eyes of the men who enforced such orders. Cold eyes, loyal only to promises of money and power. The same kind of men who now approached through the night. He needed time, shelter, and a plan. The cave he knew was still ahead, hidden behind a low rock face. If they could reach it, the ravine walls would shield them. But not if the men caught them first. The torchlight grew brighter, and the lantern light spread wide like an eye searching the ground. The warrior breathed slowly, trying to count footsteps. There were at least 2 men, possibly 3. They did not speak, which made the silence worse. Predators hunted silently. The warrior guided the children deeper, his steps careful. He carried the mother again, though every muscle strained beneath her weight. She was still unconscious, barely breathing. The oldest boy helped steady her blanket so she would not slip. The younger children moved with quiet urgency, clutching each other's hands to stay close. The ravine bent sharply, offering brief protection from the sight of the lantern and torch. Ahead, the ground rose slightly, leading to the hidden cave, but the path narrowed to a tight choke point, forcing them to walk single file. The warrior kept glancing back, knowing they were short on time. Just as they reached the narrowest section, a sharp crack echoed from behind them. A rock kicked loose under a boot. The torchlight spilled around the bend. They had been spotted. The warrior hurried the children forward, urging them to move quicker. The oldest boy picked up the smallest in his arms. The warrior gripped his knife, ready to defend as long as he needed to give the children a chance to reach safety. He could not fight off 3 armed men alone, but he would buy time. Whatever the cost, he led them up the final stretch of the slope, breath hard and fast. At the top, the cave entrance opened like a dark mouth in the rock. It was shallow at first glance, but deeper once inside, enough to hide all of them from view. It had saved lives before. He hoped it would save them again. Once the children were inside, he laid the mother gently against the wall of the cave. The oldest boy stayed by her side, holding her hand as though trying to keep her alive with his warmth alone. The warrior moved to the entrance, crouching behind stone and listening closely. His heart pounded with the rhythm of a drum, but his breath stayed controlled. The lantern light reached the bottom of the slope. One of the men spoke finally, his voice angry and rough, echoing through the ravine. He shouted about finding the woman and the children, ordering that they should not get far. The second man laughed under his breath, a sound that twisted the air with cruelty. The warrior could hear metal scrape, likely a weapon being drawn. Night felt heavier than ever. The desert had turned into a trap of darkness and echoing fear. The children stared at the cave entrance, as filled with silent pleas. The warrior kept his hand against the cave wall, grounding himself, thinking through every move. Running deeper into the desert at night with children would be too dangerous. They needed to stay hidden until the men passed or daylight returned. But hiding only worked if the men did not find the entrance. Below, the pursuers split directions, one man scanning along the lower wall, the other climbing the slope with the torch held high. His boots crushed loose stone, marking his path. The warrior could hear his breathing now, close, steady. Confident as the first man neared the cave entrance, The warrior prepared himself. He tightened his grip on the knife, muscles ready to spring. He did not want to strike first. He wanted a peaceful chance. But the night had shown no peace so far. The man's torchlight illuminated the cave mouth for a flash. But he turned away again, scanning the opposite direction. He muttered that they must still be ahead, not realizing they had doubled back into the cave. His footsteps moved away down the ravine, while the second man's voice called from below, saying he would check farther west. The warrior let out a quiet breath. They were safe for the moment, but the danger was far from gone. He knew the pursuers would search until sunrise. They would not give up easily, not when they believed those children and their mother had something they wanted. As the night deepened, the men's searching grew faint. The children finally began to rest their heads against the cold walls of the cave. The mother's breathing eased slightly, though her body remained still. The warrior sat near the entrance, keeping watch. Sleep was not an option. He listened for every sound. Every shift of gravel, every step out of place. Hours passed with tension wrapped around every heartbeat. When the storm clouds finally drifted away, moonlight reached the cave entrance. Drawing silver shapes across the ground, the warrior's thoughts wandered back to the boy's story. Losing a father, being forced from home, a town that turned from hope to cruelty. He wondered what kind of men would chase children through the desert at night. What promise had driven them so far? It was often land or money that made men heartless. He had seen it many times. The oldest boy moved closer and sat silently beside the warrior. After a long pause, he asked in a low voice if they would be safe. The warrior did not lie. He said they would be safe as long as he drew breath. He then asked about the medallion tied around the boy's neck. The boy said it belonged to his father, a small piece of copper shaped into a circle with hand-carved markings. The father said it was from a friend long ago, someone from the Apache nation. A friend who once saved his life. The boy rubbed the medallion nervously as though it were the only piece of his father left that the world had not tried to take. The warrior recognized the carving on the copper. It was an old mark, one used by a small Apache clan that lived near the river valley. A symbol of loyalty and protection between families. He wondered how the boy's father came to hold it. Perhaps there was more to this story than escaping a cruel town. Perhaps someone powerful wanted the land because they feared a rightful claim would be proven. The warrior knew there were papers, marks, and laws that men from towns used to control land. Twisting truth until they owned everything, the question now pressed on him heavily. Were these children hunted because someone wanted them gone? Or because they had something that could challenge a powerful man's lies? The mother shifted slightly, eyes opening just enough to meet the boy's gaze. She whispered his name softly, squeezing his hand. Relief flooded his face. She tried to sit up, but winced with pain. The warrior gave her more water and reassured her. The men were farther away now. She managed to whisper a warning. The men would not stop. They were paid to ensure her family disappeared. The land her husband built on was being claimed by someone who promised to bring cattle and rail workers. Someone with influence over the sheriff. Someone who convinced the town that a widow with children stood in the way of progress. The warrior asked who led those men. Her lips trembled as she spoke. A rancher with a growing empire, always seeking more. A man who did not like hearing the word no. The warrior felt anger rise quietly inside him. Many families had been chased by such greed. Too many had no one to defend them. He told her they would reach safety, but she shook her head slowly. Safety did not exist while those men still chased them. The children deserved a place to belong, not a life spent running. Before he could respond, a sharp whistle cut through the night air. The sound echoed off the ravine walls like a hawk's cry. The warrior froze. The children woke again, fear returning instantly. The pursuers were calling to each other. They were close again. Voices replaced the whistle, clearer and louder. The warrior moved closer to the entrance, gripping his knife once more. The moon gave just enough light to see two new silhouettes moving on the ridge above. More men had joined the search. The mother's eyes widened with dread. The oldest boy stood and placed himself in front of the younger ones, like a shield made of thin bone and bravery. The warrior stepped forward, body tense, ready for whatever came next. The cave suddenly felt smaller. The walls felt tighter. The night felt like it was closing in. Outside, boots scraped along the rocks. A man shouted that he had found something, and the search moved straight toward them. The sound of boots sliding over loose rock echoed down the slope like a slow warning. The warrior kept his back to the cave wall, knife ready, breath steady. The men outside spoke in harsh whispers, their voices sharpened by frustration and cold wind. They argued about tracks, claiming they saw footprints heading into the ravine. Another voice insisted the family could not have vanished that quickly. Their words pressed closer, inch by inch, till the cave entrance glowed faintly with torchlight again. The children trembled deeper inside. The youngest tried not to cry, burying her face into her brother's coat. The mother lifted her head and reached for them, trying to soothe them with quiet words, though her strength was still fading. The warrior knew they could not stay in the cave if the men searched the ravine wall by wall. The cave had hidden many travelers before, but once discovered, it would trap them instead of protecting them. He listened carefully, thinking through every possible escape. The oldest boy stepped to his side, whispering that he wanted to help. His voice carried a mix of fear and determination. The warrior placed a steady hand on his shoulder, telling him to stay inside and guard his siblings. The boy hesitated, then nodded, knowing his role mattered as much as any fight. Outside, the men spread out again. One called for the others to check above the cave. Another searched below. Their torches moved like restless flames against the rock. The warrior understood they were closing a net around them. If he waited too long, running would be impossible. He turned to the mother and told her they might need to move soon. Her eyes widened, filled with both fear and faith. She trusted him, though they had barely met. She held her children close, whispering that they must stay brave for a little longer. The warrior moved to the deeper end of the cave where the rock sloped downward into a narrow crack. Few people knew it existed. It opened into a second passage that led to an abandoned animal trail on the far side of the ridge. It was risky, dark, and steep, but it might be their only chance. He tested his weight on the slope, checking that it still held. The ground shifted with a soft crumble, but remained firm enough to carry them, as he guided the children toward it. A loud voice outside shouted that he had found a broken branch near the entrance. Another man yelled for the torch. Their footsteps approached rapidly. The warrior pushed the children into the passage, urging them to stay low and move fast. The oldest boy carried the littlest child, his steps silent but hurried. The mother tried to stand on her own, but her legs trembled. The warrior lifted her again, though she begged him not to leave the others behind. He whispered that he would never leave them. Just as the last child crawled into the hidden passage, a torchlight swept across the entrance. The warrior pressed himself flat against the stone, keeping his face shielded in shadow. The man outside stepped closer, raising the torch higher, trying to see deeper into the darkness. He took a step inside, only a few yards from discovering the trail of footprints. The warrior's heartbeat thundered beneath his ribs. If the man took one step further, everything would collapse into chaos behind the wall. The children held their breath so tightly it seemed the entire cave had gone still. The mother clung to consciousness, watching the warrior with silent hope. The man paused, leaned down, and dragged the torch across the ground. He saw faint marks that could have been tracks, but the rain had washed most details away. He cursed under his breath, claiming the storm ruined the signs. Another voice called him back, saying they found more tracks farther down. The man at the entrance hesitated one more moment, his torch inching toward the narrow passage, then finally turned away and followed the others. The warrior remained frozen until their footsteps faded. He waited a moment longer, then crawled into the passage, pulling loose brush across the back entrance to hide their exit. Inside, the path tightened, forcing them to move on hands and knees. The air was cold and stale, carrying the smell of old damp stone. Their breaths echoed softly against the narrow walls. The children crawled in a line, guided by the oldest boy, while the warrior stayed at the rear, carrying the mother carefully to avoid injuring her further. The passage eventually sloped downward into a wider opening. Faint moonlight trickled through a crack above, revealing a steep drop that led to the hidden trail. The warrior knew this path led into the outer hills, where a river cut through farmland. If they reached it before sunrise, they could follow the water to a ranching settlement known to protect wanderers and workers. It was far and rough terrain, but it offered hope. He lowered the children down one by one, using a thick vine to steady them. The mother was the last to descend, her strength barely enough to grip the vine. The warrior lowered her slowly, keeping one hand under her weight until she reached the ground safely. Once everyone stood on the narrow trail below, the warrior descended himself. Landing softly on the loose stone, the group moved west along the trail. Staying close to the rock wall where shadows covered them, the men with torches still searched the ravine behind them, unaware of the hidden exit. The night felt quieter now, but not safe. The children walked without complaint, their determination rising from the fear that chased them. The oldest boy led with steady steps, head high despite exhaustion. The warrior admired his spirit. Hardship had carved something strong in him. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast stretch of desert. Far beyond, dim lights glowed near the horizon. Fires from a settlement. Smoke rising from chimneys. It was still many miles away, but seeing it gave the children hope. The mother stared at it as if seeing a sunrise. The warrior knew the land well enough to name it. A working town where ranchers, traders, and travelers gathered. A place where no single man controlled everyone. A place where someone could start again. But hope came with risk. If the pursuers had horses or knew shortcuts, they could reach the ridge quickly. The warrior scanned the open land and listened for sounds of hooves. But all he heard was the distant wind. They continued forward, but the mother faltered again, nearly falling. The warrior caught her and eased her down against a boulder. Her lips were pale, her breathing shallow. The boy knelt beside her, holding her hand, repeating that they were close. She tried to smile, though tears filled her eyes. She whispered that she just needed to rest a moment. The warrior checked her pulse and saw she was burning with fever now. Her exhaustion had turned into illness, made worse by rain and cold wind. They could not stop long. But pushing her further might kill her. The warrior removed his coat and placed it around her, offering warmth. He handed the boy dry strips of meat from his pouch, enough to give everyone a small bit of strength. The children ate slowly, saving pieces for their mother. The warrior stood watch again, scanning the land for movement. Then he froze far behind them. Tiny flickers of light moved along the ridge, torches the pursuers had found the upper trail. The children looked to him, waiting for direction. The mother struggled to sit up, fear returning to her eyes. The oldest boy clenched his fists, anger replacing helplessness. The warrior whispered that they had to move again. The mother tried to rise but collapsed. The boy insisted he could carry her. The warrior shook his head. The boy could not carry her across miles of rough ground. The warrior lifted her once more, though his muscles burned from exhaustion. He told the boy to gather the others and follow fast. The lights behind them grew brighter, splitting into several paths. The men were spreading across the ridge, searching for movement. As they fled, the wind picked up again, howling across the barren land like a warning. The warrior ran through the darkness with the mother in his arms, children close behind, the trail twisting through rocks and dry brush. The torches spread wider behind them, cutting off routes. Closing distance, one torch moved faster than the others, following a lower path, heading straight toward the trail ahead. The warrior realized the men were trying to corner them, pushing them toward a dry ravine that dead-ended at a rock wall. If they reached that point with no way out, the men would have them trapped. The warrior stopped, eyes scanning the land. He spotted a narrow slope leading away from the main path, steep and dangerous, but it might lead to the river sooner. He motioned for the children to follow. The oldest boy nodded and guided them down the incline. The warrior followed with the mother, sliding on loose stones while keeping his hold steady. Halfway down, 2 torches appeared above them. A man shouted orders, his voice full of triumph, certain he had cornered them. The warrior kept moving, but the men rushed down the slope. Closing the gap, The warrior reached the bottom, but the path opened onto a dry riverbed. The stones there shifted underfoot, slowing them down. The torches drew closer. The warrior placed the mother behind a large boulder and told the boy to keep everyone low and quiet. The boy tried to argue, insisting he would fight. The warrior looked him in the eyes, speaking quietly but firmly, saying the children needed him more alive than in a fight he could not win. The boy finally nodded, tears filling his eyes, and pulled the youngest children behind cover. The warrior stepped out into the open riverbed. Knife drawn, shoulders squared, ready to face the men long enough for the family to escape again. He could see their shadows moving closer, heavy boots sliding down rock, rough voices calling to one another, the glow of torches reflecting off the stone walls. The men reached the edge of the riverbed, staring down at him with hardened eyes. One stepped forward, holding a rifle pointed low, as if confident he would not need to lift it. Another held a rope, like he planned to drag someone back alive. The warrior stood tall, torchlight washing over him, wind rippling through his hair. The mother watched from behind the boulder, whispering for him to run. The children held each other. Unable to look away, the men descended into the riverbed, circling him. Footsteps crunching on dry stones, the warrior tightened his grip. Ready, but before a single word was spoken, a new sound rose from behind the enemy's line. Hoof! Fast! Fast! Coming, straight toward them. Hoofbeats rushed across the dry riverbed, loud enough to shake dust from the rocks. The torches flickered as the men turned, startled by the sudden noise. A rider charged toward them from the west, silhouette outlined by moonlight. The men scattered back up the slope, unsure if it was another threat sent by the family or someone who happened to cross their path. The warrior held his ground, waiting for the rider to come closer. The horse slid to a stop just a few yards away, kicking up gravel. The rider dismounted with a swift motion, raising both hands to show peace. He wore worn leather and carried a rifle slung across his back, not drawn. His voice carried calm authority as he said he had been tracking these same men for 2 days. He had heard about a widow fleeing a settlement east of the canyon and understood why men might chase her. He said he worked for ranchers who did not bow to force or greed. His eyes moved from the warrior to the children hidden behind the rocks, and then to the men who lurked on the slope. The chasers recognized him, their faces twisted with anger. They accused him of interfering with business that did not concern him. He answered calmly that land stolen through threats and fear had never been rightful business. His voice hardened when he said he was sent by men ready to dispute claims with the sheriff and the court, not with torches and midnight hunts. The warrior saw the hesitation ripple through the group of pursuers. They looked at each other, their resolve shaken. Threats meant less when someone offered real legal resistance, backed by landowners with influence. The lead pursuer tried to act fearless, barking that they still had orders to bring the woman back dead or alive. He lifted his rifle, pointing it toward the riverbed. Before he could aim, the warrior stepped forward, knife ready. The new rider moved beside him, hand resting on his own weapon. The two men stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a barrier of calm defiance. The leader hesitated again, reading their stance. Around him, his followers shifted. Unsure if violence was worth the risk now that they no longer held advantage, the rider offered them one last choice. Leave now and return home, or stay and face consequences from people who held power far beyond their employer. The men cursed, spit into the dirt, and slowly backed away. The leader threw one last glare toward the warrior before turning his horse up the ridge. Torches dimmed in the distance as they rode east, swallowed by the night. Silence returned to the canyon. The warrior lowered his blade, breath heavy. The rider nodded in respect. He explained that the family's land might still be in danger, but they had allies now. The ranchers to the west had heard rumors and wanted to protect those wronged unfairly. They believed the law should settle claims, not threats. He said they would take the widow to town where a doctor could treat her fever and where her children could rest without running. The warrior returned to the boulder and knelt beside the mother. Her eyes fluttered open, still weak, but she recognized safety in the quiet night. The children gathered around her, hugging her gently. She thanked the warrior, voice trembling, saying she thought her children would die out there. The warrior told her strength had carried them farther than she realized. Her children survived because she fought for them with every breath. They traveled west together under dawn's first light. The sky shifted from gray to pale gold, warming the cold air. The children walked beside the rider's horse, while the warrior carried the mother on his saddle. Each mile pulled them farther from fear and closer to a life that promised rest. By afternoon, they reached a settlement surrounded by open pasture and cattle herds. Smoke rose from chimneys, and people worked in the fields. A woman from the ranch ran to greet the rider, asking about the family. When she saw the mother's condition, she led them straight to the clinic at the edge of town. The healer examined her and prepared warm cloths to bring down her fever. The children sat nearby, clutching each other's hands. Hopeful for the first time in days, the warrior stepped outside to give them space, but stayed close enough to hear when the doctor called him back. The fever had broken. Exhaustion still weighed on her, but she would heal. When she woke fully, she reached for the warrior's hand. She told him her husband had spoken of an Apache ally long ago, a man who once stood beside him during a cattle raid near the river valley. She realized that man might have been from the same clan as the warrior standing before her now. The warrior nodded slowly, understanding the mark on the copper medallion. Their paths had crossed long before this night. The ranchers offered the family a small cabin near the river, promising fair pay if they chose to work. They would not be forced, only welcomed. The children followed the oldest boy as he walked the land around the cabin, exploring with wonder instead of fear. He promised to rebuild what his father taught him. He wanted to grow corn by the water and raise goats for milk. The warrior told him he had the spirit of a leader, strong and steady. The mother asked the warrior to stay for a while, not in debt, but in friendship. She said she wanted her children to grow up knowing people from different worlds could protect each other. The warrior agreed to stay through the season, helping them settle, teaching the children how to track small game and find clean water. They laughed more often now. Sitting around campfires with food in their bellies and warmth on their faces, word eventually reached the town nearby that the men who chased the family had been brought under investigation. Some had fled. Others confessed to taking money from the ranchers seeking their land. The sheriff, pressured by the ranching settlements, reopened land claims and began questioning the legality of the documents used against the widow. Justice moved slowly, but this time it moved in their favor. The warrior stood beside the river. At sunset one evening, as the children played in the grass, the mother walked beside him, leaning on a carved walking stick while recovering her strength. She thanked him again, saying he had done more than save their lives. He had given them a future. The warrior replied that they gave themselves that future by refusing to give up. The land around them glowed gold beneath the fading sun. The river carried soft light across the valley. The wind no longer sounded like a warning, but like a promise. The children called out to the warrior, asking him to join their game. He smiled and walked toward them. Leaving behind a long night of fear and stepping into a day filled with hope, the family finally had a place to belong. And the warrior found peace knowing their journey led not to despair, but to safety, love, and a new beginning in the old American West. Their story settled into the land like roots in fresh soil, strong enough to survive whatever came next.